Hello, my dear students. 学生们，你们好. I am teacher Lulu, and I help corporate students improve their English. So, if you are a working professional in the corporate world, I am probably a very suitable teacher for you, specifically if you're Chinese. So, let's begin today's lesson. We are in category C about timeline pressure, and the lesson is C3, which is deadline compression. This is a part of the 16 course lesson, 4 categories for a lesson per category. And by the end of today's lesson, you're going to learn how to explain why timelines become unrealistic in a professional way. So let's begin by going over some vocabulary. I think that vocabulary in many ways is the cornerstone for the new lesson, for each new lesson. So let's go over some vocabulary. So first, compressed, and then buffer, and then bandwidth. Go ahead and tell me what you think these three words mean, starting with compressed. If you said something along the lines of it means something that is, that gets squeezed, think about when you travel and they have these vacuum travel bags. You're compressing the clothing. That's good. So if you're squeezing time or space, you are compressing. And in our professional world, and for today, the word compressed is about compressing time. So squeezing in time. For example, if your weekend plans go from 3 days to only 1 day because of a last minute project, your schedule is compressed. Good. Let's go over the next word, buffer. What do you think the word buffer means? Buffer is, so usually what I would do, I would hear my student explain and I would guide them. So I would guide them towards the direction of explaining that buffer is extra safety time in a schedule. So for instance, if you predict you only need 40 minutes to get to work, but to give it some buffer, you are going to leave 10 minutes early. So you're going to prepare 50 minutes, so you have a 10-minute buffer. So a buffer is extra safety time. Sometimes my students have a difficult time saying the precise word, so they might say secure to try to say safe or safety, things like that. So that's something I can point out with my students. And then next, bandwidth. So bandwidth mentioned in the previous classes. What does bandwidth mean? In simple terms, it's how much work you can handle. And in other words, if the time is reduced but work stays the same, your bandwidth becomes a problem. And which one do you think is worse? No buffer or low bandwidth, and why? And that's a reflective question. I like to ask my student a reflective question to begin. Sometimes it helps them really think and prime their mind for the lesson ahead. And then we're going to go into some focus language. Focus language are words, phrases that we will say often in our class. So I will show them to you here. Please read them out loud. And since you are just simulating as a student, I will read these out loud with you. The timeline may be compressed. This may require additional resources. The schedule leaves limited buffer. Good. Now here is an introduction. Sometimes a project timeline suddenly becomes shorter. What are some reasons why this may happen? Why does it happen that a project timeline suddenly becomes shorter? What do you think? So if your answers are maybe a client wants the product earlier or a deadline moves forward, that's good. So when that happens, which one is it? The timeline may be compressed. Now I'm going to explain the idea a little bit deeper. So a deadline compression means that the same amount of work must be completed in less time. I'm going to copy and paste this sentence that I prepared for you guys. Go ahead, please read this out loud. Now, if something like this happens, which kind of problems may this cause? So sometimes knowing the why helps to motivate us to learn how to handle things like that. So what kind of problems may this cause? So this is where we brainstorm a bit. Some valid answers are stress, rushed work, less testing, and mistakes. Cool. Okay, so these are great details, but now let's learn some label, aka also known as system language. So let's do a phrase and these phrases we just said earlier, and then let's explain them a little bit further. So for example, we said the timeline may be compressed. What does this mean? If you're saying something like the schedule may become shorter, yes. And then the next one, this may require additional resources. What does that mean? What does additional resources mean? And you can go back to the triangle we mentioned in the previous lesson. And then finally, if the schedule leaves a limited buffer, what does that mean? Maybe not enough time for unexpected problems, right? Because the reason for buffer is for unexpected problems. Let me write that down. Buffer equals unexpected problems. So in the live session, I would practice a bit more with these 3 core sentences, the focus language. And I want you to look at these 3 sentences right now, and we're going to look at the next part, practice. So in the next part, you're going to practice by answering with one of these or 2 of these. So these actually can be stacked. So let's practice. Scenario 1. Let me put it on the board for you guys. Please read it out loud. A project originally had 8 weeks. Now it must finish in 4 weeks. Expected idea. What do you think out of the 3 you can say? If you said that timeline may be compressed and it may require additional resources like labor, good. Or you can say the timeline may be compressed and the schedule may leaves limited buffer for mistakes. That's also correct. But I think because 8 to 4 is so dramatic, I would think the stacking of these 2 would be more suitable. Let's try another one. Okay, but before we do, let me put this on the board. This is not a formula, but it is a way of thinking. Situation, risk, and adjustment. So you explain the situation, you share the risk, and then you provide the adjustment you think that could be suitable for this. So another scenario. You had 7 people on your team, and now 3 of them transferred. The project is due in 1 week. How would you respond to that? This may require additional resources. The quality may be compensated. Good. Okay. So as we went over these, we learned that when the timeline is compressed, there is another thing that can happen, which is an increase of delivery risk, meaning not delivering on time. So this phrase is beautiful. You can say delivery risk or at a risk of late delivery instead of a lot of details. We want to keep it in the label and not the details in the beginning. So for a final overview, if the timeline is compressed, the schedule has what? If the timeline is compressed, what happens to the schedule? If you said limited buffer, you are correct. Okay, good. That is a wrap for today's lesson, C3 deadline compression. Make sure you tune in for C4, which is happening right after this lesson. Okay, bye guys.